Acquiring a business? BizNexus simplifies it. Access thousands of updated opportunities in our DIY marketplace or supercharge team sourcing with OmniSource, your all-in-one platform for on-market, off-market, and coming-soon deals. Scale smarter today. Learn more or book a demo at www.biznexus.com.
Disclaimer from the always present legal team. Podcast conversations don't necessarily reflect the views of BizNexus Incorporated. Everything you hear is informational news and updates from around the industry. We're not recommending any investments. We're not offering any investment advice. Be sure to do your own homework.
All right, so listeners, you've been digging deep, haven't you, into these big business acquisitions, the ones fueled by SBA loans.
Yeah, some serious business moves.
You sent over this case study by Bruce Marks. And, wow, this one's a wild ride.
Definitely wild.
We're talking a synergistic acquisition, seller financing, and a 6x multiple.
Those are some serious business buzzwords.
Ready to unpack all this?
Absolutely. This is like a textbook example of how to structure a deal to make acquisitions happen when they might seem impossible.
Okay, so set the stage for us. Bruce Marks lays out a scenario where a buyer wants 88% ownership, and the seller is actually rolling over 12% equity.
Right.
Big deal, right?
It is. Rolling over equity just means the seller's keeping some skin in the game, reinvesting a bit of what they're getting back into the company, shows they believe in the buyer's vision,
And it's not like they're just handing over the keys for a small sum. This is a $12 million price tag.
Huge.
$10.6 million for the buyer's share, plus another $200,000 in deal costs. Not your average lemonade stand.
Not at all. And this is where we get to that synergistic acquisition term. It's not just buying a company. It's about making something even bigger and better together, like 1 + 1 = 3.
So is it like peanut butter and chocolate? Each one's great on its own, but amazing together.
Yeah, exactly. And there are different types of synergy. So you've got operational synergy, which is like streamlining processes, like merging 2 factories and getting rid of redundant equipment. Then there's strategic synergy, expanding your reach. Think of a tech company that buys a competitor to get into a new market. And then you've got financial synergy, which can improve cash flow or even lower taxes.
Okay, so it's all about those win-win situations. And Bruce Marks mentions a 6x multiple. What does that even mean in plain English?
So think of EBITDA as like a company's profitability. A 6x multiple just means they paid 6 times that number. Pretty significant. Suggests they see a ton of potential for growth and profit.
So they're betting big on the future.
Yeah.
But how do you even finance something this big? Over $10 million. That's a lot of cash.
It gets interesting here. Get ready. The financing is a bit of a roller coaster. You've got a $1.1 million equity injection from the buyer. That's their upfront cash. And then there are 2 seller notes for $2 million each.
Hold on. Seller notes. Is that like an IOU for the buyer?
Yeah, you got it. The seller's lending money to the buyer, helps them finance the purchase. Happens a lot in these big acquisitions, especially when you're working with SBA loans. And speaking of SBA loans, there's a $5 million SBA 7A loan in the mix, key piece of the puzzle. And to wrap it all up, there's a $700,000 Pari Passu loan, which often comes along with SBA loans.
Wow, that's a lot of moving pieces. But what really sticks out to me is the seller financing, those $2 million notes. That's a huge chunk of the deal.
Oh, absolutely. Seller financing makes up 39% of the deal's total value, shows a ton of confidence from the seller, and it probably helped a lot to get that SBA loan approved. The SBA likes to see that the seller has some skin in the game, too.
But these seller notes aren't just typical loans, right? Bruce Marks mentioned something about triggers.
You're picking up on the details. That's where things get really interesting. These notes have conditions for repayment, tied to how well the company does.
So how do they work without breaking SBA rules? Because I thought they don't usually allow burnouts, where repayment is linked to hitting financial targets.
That's the clever part. They're contingent seller notes. So repayment can be influenced by performance, but it's not directly tied to those specific earnings numbers. It's a crucial difference. Keeps the SBA happy.
Okay, so we've got this crazy financing structure, a synergistic acquisition, a big bet on future growth. Bruce Marks also says this was a stock sale. Why is that important?
Great question.
Yeah.
A stock sale means the buyer's getting the company's shares, the whole thing, assets and liabilities. It's different from an asset sale where they just pick and choose what assets they want.
And why do a stock sale in this case? Was it to keep things simple?
It's a bit more nuanced. Bruce Marks points out there weren't many significant physical assets involved. The company's value was in those intangible assets. Things like customer relationships and how they operate, stuff you can't really touch or measure like a piece of equipment.
So a stock sale makes sense if the heart of the company is in those less tangible things. Like buying a thriving garden. You want the soil, the plants, everything that makes it work.
That's a great analogy. You're not just buying the tomatoes, you're buying the whole ecosystem.
This is getting juicy. We've covered so much. Synergistic acquisition, that huge 6x multiple, and this crazy financing with those interesting seller notes. I'm already feeling like I know more about business acquisitions.
Me too. It's like a masterclass in making deals. Shows how planning and knowing the SBA rules can make things happen even when it seems impossible.
But I'm sure our listeners are wondering, what's the big takeaway here? What can we learn from this crazy acquisition?
What do you think?
Honestly, it's the seller financing. And those contingent seller notes, they're like the secret sauce.
Yeah, you're right. It shows how creative you can be with seller financing to bridge the gap. When what the buyer has and what the seller wants don't quite match up. And those triggers for repayment are key. They encourage both sides to work together and make sure everyone's invested in the future. Win-win.
But I have to know more about those triggers. What are they? How do they work?
Let's dive into that next. Remember those contingent seller notes? Time to unravel the mystery and see how they make everyone happy. Even the SBA. So let's unravel this mystery of the seller note triggers. We know the SBA says no to those traditional earnouts, the ones tied to hitting specific numbers.
Right. So how do they structure the repayment? To keep everyone happy, and of course keep the SBA on board.
It's like finding a sweet spot. You want to reward the seller if the company does well, but you got to stick to those SBA guidelines. It's like this: instead of saying, hey, you get an extra $1 million if the company hits a 10% profit margin, the agreement might say, we'll pay back some of that seller note early if you reach a certain revenue growth level.
So it's still connected to performance, but it's worded in a way that keeps the SBA happy.
Exactly. And these triggers, they can be tied to all sorts of things, not just revenue. Could be customer acquisition, expanding into new markets, or even how efficient your operations are.
Right. That makes sense. It encourages both the buyer and the seller to work together towards the same goals. But it sounds really complicated to figure out and put into practice.
Oh, absolutely. You need lawyers and financial experts to make sure everything's by the book, following those SBA guidelines, and of course, meeting the needs of both the buyer and the seller.
Bruce Marks doesn't get into the specifics of the triggers in this case, but he does say they were a big reason this deal worked out. Sounds like those seller notes were a real balancing act.
Definitely. It shows how important it is to have people on both sides who really know what they're doing, experts in SBA financing who can handle all these details.
I'm starting to see why Bruce Marks thought this was such an interesting case study. We've talked about the synergy, the big 6x multiple, and that complicated financing with the seller notes. Anything else about this deal that jumps out at you?
Well, there's one more thing we should mention. It was a stock sale.
Right, you mentioned that before, because there weren't a lot of physical assets involved.
Exactly. The real value here was in the intangible assets. Things like customer relationships, their intellectual property, and how they run their operations. Those things you can't really touch or measure like a piece of equipment.
So a stock sale makes sense when the real value is in those intangible things. Like buying a fully furnished house. You're getting everything you need.
Great analogy. But it's important to remember that every deal is different. The best way to structure it depends on a lot of things. What kind of business it is, what both sides want, and the tax implications.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground here. We dug deep into this synergistic acquisition, from the 6x multiple to that intricate financing with the seller notes, and we even talked about why they went with a stock sale, a real journey into the world of big business deals.
Definitely. It shows how creative people can be when they're putting together these acquisitions, especially with SBA loans.
I feel like I know so much more about mergers and acquisitions now. But before we go, I'm sure our listener wants to know, what's the big takeaway here? What can we learn from Bruce Marks and this case study?
That's the question, isn't it? What do you think?
Honestly, it's got to be the seller financing. And those contingent seller notes. They made this whole thing possible.
Absolutely. This deal shows that seller financing can be really creative. It can bridge the gap between what the buyer can afford and what the seller wants to get.
And those triggers for repayment are so fascinating. It makes sure everyone is working together and wants the company to succeed.
It's a win-win for everyone. But it also raises a question. If you were in this situation, the buyer or the seller, what would be most important to you? When you're negotiating those triggers, what would you focus on to make sure it works out for everyone?
That's a good question to think about. It makes you realize how much strategy goes into these deals.
It all comes down to finding the right balance between risk and reward, making sure the buyer and the seller are on the same page.
Well, I think we've given our listener a lot to think about today. This deep dive into Bruce Marks' case study has been amazing, like peeling back the layers of a complicated business deal.
It reminds us that even in finance, you need to be creative and work together.
And to anyone out there who's ever dreamed of doing a big business deal like this, remember, knowledge is power. Keep learning, keep exploring, and you never know, you might find yourself sitting at that negotiating table someday.
And we'll be here with more deep dives to help you along the way.
Until then, happy deal-making, everyone. Yeah, it really makes you think about all the different angles, especially with those seller note triggers. If you were the buyer, would you want to pay off those notes as fast as possible, like go for fast revenue growth? Or would you focus on building something solid for the long term, even if it meant paying back the notes more slowly?
And from the seller side, it's about trust. Do you connect those triggers to things you can still control? Or do you trust the buyer to hit those ambitious targets, even with all the uncertainty?
It's kind of like a high-stakes chess game, isn't it? Every move matters.
Absolutely. Bruce Marks really shows us how complex these deals can be, how much strategy goes into them. It's not just about the numbers, it's about understanding what both sides want and creating an agreement that works for everyone.
We've definitely given our listeners a lot to think about. It's been like peeling back the layers of a really complicated onion, seeing all the little details and the strategy behind this acquisition.
It's a good reminder that even in finance, it's all about being creative and working together.
And for anyone out there who's ever thought about doing a big business deal, remember, knowledge is power. Keep learning, keep exploring, and who knows, maybe you'll be the one at the negotiating table someday.
And we'll be here with more deep dives to help you along the way.
Until then, happy deal-making, everyone.
T215.
Thinking of exiting your business or taking on a private equity partner to help you grow faster? BizNexus has you covered. Tap into our network of thousands of best-fit investors, acquirers, and proven M&A advisors, and we'll help you begin the relationship confidentially on your terms, your timeline. Learn more at biznexus.com.